Welcome to the Iron Bank.
From the moment we read about the Iron Bank in the books, we loved it because it was such an atypical element of a fantasy world. Banking, it doesn't really factor into most high fantasy, but it was so well drawn and felt like it grounded the world in such a historical kind of a zone that we were really excited to get to it.
The Iron Bank plays an important part in this conflict, but it's almost always behind the scenes. So we've heard Tywin Lannister talking about it, for instance, how much the Crown is in debt to the Iron Bank, and we've heard others refer to it, but we haven't seen it yet. And so it was important for us to finally get a sense of what this institution is all about, and it's really, at its heart, heartless. I mean, it's purely about lending money and getting money returned with interest, and if you fail to repay your loan, they'll figure out a way to get their money back, and they always do. And Stannis is desperate for gold at this point because he suffered a terrible defeat at Blackwater, lost pretty much his entire navy, all but I think 32 ships, much of his army, and much of his support. And finally, Davos has a plan for how they can regroup. But before they can do that, they have to somehow convince these bankers who are completely cold-blooded and aren't interested in any kind of emotional arguments why Stannis is the man to bet on.
And Davos really understands what it is that makes the Iron Bank tick. He knows how to hit the nerve that's going to make them give Stannis the money, because he has a very good point that Tywin Lannister is sort of the bulwark of the Lannister power that they've chosen to back, and he's older, and once he is gone, the Lannisters become a much less enticing investment for the Iron Bank of Braavos, and Stannis starts to look much better in comparison.
He's a tried and tested battle commander, and he doesn't just talk about paying people back, he does it.
We're going home. It's all right. It's me, Yara.
You can't trick me.
I'm not tricking you, Theon. I'm saving
Not
you.
Theon! Reek! Reek! My name is Reek!
I think it's probably a surprise for both Yara and Theon/Reek when they first see each other. Yara knows that her brother's been tortured. I mean, she got that box last season. She knows that Theon's favorite toy was taken from him, so she's expecting to find someone who's been damaged, but I don't think she knew quite how far he'd sunk. He suffered so much trauma at the hands of Ramsay that his identity has been submerged, maybe drowned, and replaced with this character Reek, who's just a castrated, terrified servant who will do anything his master asks. And Theon/Reek doesn't want to admit that he even recognizes her, because to admit that would be to admit that he's Theon, which means rebelling against his master, which means he'll be tortured more. And really everything that he does at this point is pain avoidance. You know, it's just trying to keep away from that crucifix that he was on for all of season 3 and just survive and do everything his master says. So when he sees her and she's trying to get him to flee with him, all he can think is, how can I stop this? How can I be loyal to my master? And she, you know, for such a proud man and for such a proud family, this is kind of a shocking development, and she can't really believe it at first, but ultimately he's truly dead to her.
I'll leave the King's Guard. I'll take my place as your son and heir if you let Tyrion live. Done.
The thing that we always liked about the scene is that Jaime has decided, here's something I can do to help my brother, and it's a huge sacrifice for him because he doesn't want to leave King's Landing. He doesn't want to go back to Casterly Rock. He has no interest in being the future lord of Casterly Rock. He wants to stay in King's Landing because that means staying with Cersei, and Cersei's the one he loves. But he's willing to give up all of that to save his brother. So for him, it's quite a painful ask, and he's a little shocked because Tywin's ready for it. I mean, Tywin's been expecting this from the beginning, and you sort of realize when Tywin responds immediately that this has been a long-term plan. You know, this is probably ever since Tyrion was arrested. Tywin never fails to take advantage of a crisis, and that's what he's doing right here, and sees this as a way of consolidating Lannister power, getting what he wants from Jaime after Jaime had refused him before, and getting rid of Tyrion all in one fell swoop. So it's a win-win for Tywin.
It's a drama within the Lannister household. So the big standoff between Tyrion and Tywin is obvious. But there are also key players in a scene, Jaime and Cersei, obviously, and we know what's happening there. And there's this wonderful tug of push-pull that's happening all the time within those 4 points of contention, if you will. So it was very important for us to be able to constantly bounce ball off of these characters and see what reactions they produce.
The imp rounded on him. He slapped the king across the face and called him a vicious idiot and a fool.
I think if Tyrion has a tragic flaw, it may be that he sometimes lets his distastes for hypocrisy and stupidity get in the way of his good sense. And it's been fun to watch him sometimes literally smack Joffrey down. But in this trial, the chickens have come home to roost on a lot of that behavior, and they've provided a lot of ammunition for Cersei to ground the evidence against him in reality for the most part.
After we received word of Robb Stark's death, he didn't seem gladdened by the news. Perhaps his marriage to Sansa Stark had made him more sympathetic to the Northern cause.
Tyrion is clearly more wounded by Varys' testimony than by the testimony of anybody that precedes Varys, but on some level, he has to admit that Varys told him explicitly that if push came to shove, he was not going to sacrifice his life needlessly for Tyrion. So I think Tyrion is wounded, and you can tell the fact that he chooses to ask Varys a question and doesn't even bother cross-examining anyone else. He doesn't really expect that he's going to get the better of Varys in that situation. I think he wants Varys to feel bad.
Crown may call its next witness.
Shay. Please don't.
I am a whore. Remember?
The Shay testimony is really what puts him over the edge. It pushes him into the kind of immoderate, passionate behavior that he occasionally veers into.
I will not give my life for Joffrey's murder, and I know I'll get no justice here. I demand a trial by combat.
There's a big standoff. Tywin makes a grand stand, and Tyrion will not have any of it. Basically, he defies his father and staring him right in the eyes and say that I'm not going to fall victim. I'm going to defend myself any way I can, and the only way he knows how, historically, is by combat.
He threatens Tywin with the one ace up his sleeve. If Tyrion dies and Jaime is a Kingsguard, then Tywin's direct family line disappears, especially since he knows that the trial by combat is going to be an unlikely thing for him to survive.